Brittany.
Hello, Rachel.
So today I wanted to talk about public-private partnerships, non-governmental organizations, and
that's a slew of words.
There's a lot going into this, but in a nutshell, the private sector, we know, is better at doing most things than government is. So a lot of people think, well, why doesn't the government outsource a lot of what it is doing that it probably shouldn't be doing to the private sector? And I agree with that, but there's a problem.
Okay.
A lot of times, the government still maintains control of those functions rather than just letting them go and the government not being involved in something that it shouldn't be involved in, which is what I think people mean when they say just let the private sector do it. Instead, the government maintains control and they just give a grant. You know, sometimes it's a no-bid contract. In other words, other organizations, private sector organizations might compete for those grants. And then the government will decide, you know, who's their best friend out there. Or maybe they don't publicize that this grant is going out there to let people compete and bid for the best price. And so it becomes kind of cronyism.
So they're not really working together. They're not rolling up their sleeves and working on a project together. It's basically the government like picking their friend and giving them money to do a project. When you say that, what came to my mind was roads. Like the government doesn't have a road company, right? There's different construction companies that work on it.
Right.
I know a lot of times the government has to, you know, do road construction. And so they have to they have to pick a company to award a contract to. And sometimes it's like, somebody's brother has a company. Oh, randomly they get this money. Like that's what my mind went to. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. Building roads is a good example. A lot of people think, well, without the government, who would build the roads? Well, road companies would build the roads. It's just a matter of who pays for it. And you know, how does it get paid for? You know, maybe toll roads is an idea that's been bandied about. Of course, people hate toll roads. But I mean, that's a really good example. There's a lot of money involved. And in your example where somebody's got a brother that's in the business, say there's another business that doesn't have a brother in the government, right? And they could do it for half the price or a fraction of the price. You know, do they get a shot at quoting for the business, earning the business? You know, maybe not. That's one problem is it's sometimes not very fair or not very economical how these relationships with the private sector are formed. And so there can be a lot of corruption, right? And then another problem, which we've seen crop up a lot, is the government using the private sector, private companies, to do things that the government is not supposed to do some unconstitutional things. And we saw this a lot with censorship. You know, people say, well, Facebook can censor whoever they want. They're not subject to First Amendment. You know, the Constitution applies to the government and they're not the government. They're a private company. They don't have to give anyone a platform. You know, it's like you don't have to let anyone come into your house and say things that you find objectionable. But instead, the government would go like kind of through the back door and tell Facebook, you know what, that's a nice social media company you got there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it in the regulatory environment, you know? And so they would pressure Facebook and other social media companies to censor the voices that they did not like. Or they would even write letters to Amazon and say, you're not allowed to sell this book. Or not that you're not allowed to, but, you know, you better not.
We would highly advise against it.
Right. So obviously the government is not supposed to restrict speech. But when they're telling these other speech platforms to do it, that's also very problematic. And that is a public-private partnership that I have a lot of problems with. So, and also, when disasters happen, earthquakes and things, and organizations like the Red Cross get called in. And I'm not specifically saying anything about the Red Cross. I'm just saying, for instance, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, come in to help. And then the government pays them funds that Congress has said, oh, we got to pass a bunch of money to help the victims of Hurricane X or Earthquake Y. And then they allocate that money to an organization to do it. Then there's also the opportunity for corruption. Mm-hmm. And maybe the government shouldn't be doing charity work and relief work in the first place. When these disasters happen and somebody hosts a fundraiser or a GoFundMe and they're just flooded with all this money, like it's amazing how much money the private people can raise for other victims. Like when people are in need, like Americans come together like no one else. And so maybe we don't need the government in the way of that, or being a third party, or deciding who gets to divvy out the money. Like maybe that's not the government's job. And then maybe the government shouldn't be awarding, billions of dollars in contracts for private organizations to do it. Maybe people should just give directly to the private organization and let them do the best job they can, and people will see the results of that and like either give them money or not give them money, So
what do you think is the worst example of this?
Well, several years ago, I saw a movie called Poverty, Inc., which I talk about all the time. It shook me. Mm-hmm. It talked a lot about the tsunami in, was it Tahiti?
I can't remember, but I remember donating to it.
That big tsunami back in like 2008 or something.
Oh, yeah, 9 or 10. Yeah, I remember it. Yeah. I donated to it. I don't remember.
Yeah. Oh, it was awful. This massive wave caused this just massive tsunami, and a lot of people died, and like it was just awful. And like the whole world was just kind of overwhelmed by, this disaster. And it also, the Poverty Inc. also talked about Haiti and the earthquake of 2010, and how people that survived that tsunami told leaders in Haiti, you survived the earthquake, now you got to survive the NGOs. And I just thought that was so striking because...
Yeah, explain that a little bit, what that means.
What it means is that after the tsunami, after the earthquake, a lot of these non-governmental organizations came in with lots and lots of money and not a lot of good ideas about how to really help. And so a lot of the relief efforts got very distorted. The famous example is, I don't mean to beat up on the Red Cross, but I mean, this is true. You can verify this. They got like $6 billion to rebuild houses in Haiti, and they ended up building, I think, like 6. And it's because the ideas in Washington don't often translate well to like a third world country where they don't have really a deed of records. And the rules for the Red Cross building houses happen to be that you have to own title to the property in order to build a house. Well, that's problematic. That's a little piece of red tape that makes a lot of sense to us in the United States, but in Haiti, they don't really have that. So you can't get legitimate title to any land. So what happens to the $6 billion?
It goes in someone's pockets, somebody's pockets, right?
Yeah, it goes somewhere. But like the people on the ground knew what they needed. And if the money had just been released to them or given to them in the first place, they could have handled things. But anyway, the movie Poverty, Inc. goes into a lot of your question, like what does that mean? Like what really happened? Why are the NGOs such a disaster after the disaster? And that's why. And so we see a lot of that happening during COVID, there were a lot of NGOs that did stuff, and with the immigration and border issue, Catholic Charities, a bunch of NGOs were helping immigrants do various things, and not all of it really good stuff. And in fact, some of it, I believe, like actively nefarious, like that assisted in trafficking people and children.
Now, the problem is that they're getting some government funding without being a government organization too, right? That's part of the big problem.
Well, it's just a lot of corruption.
Okay.
And if it weren't for the government contracts, the government money just dumped on them because they have the right relationships in Washington. If it was all about private donors, they would be answerable to individual donors.
That was going to be my next question, or my next thought, is that's what makes this so hard is, the reason the market and the private sector work so well is who to hold accountable when something goes wrong. And the same way with the government. If the government, gets us into a war, we know who to blame. It's the government. If a private organization does something we don't like, we know who to blame. But when you have these partnerships and everything's all mixed together, it's kind of like, okay, we see bad things going on, but not only do we not know which person is to blame, but they can do the Spider-Man meme, if you know what that is. Like, they can point fingers at each other. There's like this meme where it's like everybody, like, it's like 4 people dressed as Spider-Man, and they're all like pointing at each other. So they can all finger point, and nobody really knows who to blame, and it all gets kind of lost in this chaotic mess. So that's a problem, because you have to be able to know who to hold accountable if something goes wrong.
Yeah, and with these non-government organizations, they're kind of quasi-government rather than non-government. So, there's just something to be aware of, and that's why it's so important for the government to stick to its constitutionally mandated functions and mind its own business, if you will, and not try to do everything. I think it was Davy Crockett. There was. He was a congressman, actually, and he wrote this long letter.
Davy Crockett was Davy Crockett from Davy Crockett?
Yeah,
from Disney?
or was it Daniel Boone? No, Davy Crockett was a congressman, and Congress wanted to give some money to this
raccoon hat with the. Sorry. I'm questioning Rachel right now.
Don't question me. I am the science. But yeah, he was a congressman, and there was a bill before Congress to give charity to this poor widow who had lost everything in a fire or whatever. And he said no. And he wrote this long letter about why not. Is because it's not up to Congress to do charity work. Now, obviously, we've gotten way, way far away from that. And Congress now does a lot of things that should be considered charity work. And I think they do them uncharitably. And I think Trump's visit to California and to the Western North Carolina just recently, at the time of this taping, it kind of demonstrates why government should just stay out of it. Just let people do what people are good at doing and keep government in its lane. Stay in your lane, government.
Churches, communities, they when they are allowed to do a fabulous job, and individuals as well. That's a really great point. We will leave it there. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast and share with your friends. And until next time, we will talk to you later.
See you later.